Who would steal a wife from her grieving husband and why? Marcus thought he lost Sarah in a fiery crash 5 years ago, but today he found her soul trapped in a billionaire's mansion. When he confronted the CEO about the portrait on her wall, the how became a nightmare. She handed him a DNA hospital report that proved his wife's death was a manufactured lie. The hospital didn't bury her, they sold her. And the secret behind that locked door, it's about to break the internet. Don't scroll, because the truth is more dangerous than fiction. Marcus was a man built from the bricks of tragedy. 5 years ago, he was a rising architect with a beautiful wife named Sarah and a future that shone brighter than the sun. Today, he was a ghost in a denim jacket, working double shifts as a high-end courier just to keep his daughter Maya fed. He was the who, the forgotten victim of a system that favors the elite. The Sterling estate sat on a hill overlooking the city like a silent gargoyle. It was a place of glass, steel, and secrets. Marcus had been sent there to deliver a rare 18th-century medical cabinet. As he pushed his cart through the vaulted foyer, he felt an unnatural chill. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress. As Marcus rounded the corner of the main gallery, his heart didn't just thud, it detonated. There, centered on a wall of white marble, was a gold-framed portrait. It was Sarah, but it wasn't the Sarah he remembered from the hospital bed. This was Sarah in a silver gown, looking regal, healthy, and terrifyingly alive. Sarah, the word escaped his lips like a prayer. Marcus didn't think. He didn't breathe. He lunged toward the painting, his rough, calloused hands reaching for the canvas. He expected his hand to pass through a hologram, but the oil paint was thick and real. "Get away from that," a voice boomed. Mrs. Eleanor Sterling, the woman who controlled the city's economy, stood at the top of the stairs. She was wearing a blood-red dress, but her face was the color of ash. When she saw Marcus, when she saw the resemblance between the man in the torn jacket and the man in the old photos she had hidden, she nearly collapsed. "Explain this," Marcus roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers. "Why is my wife's face in your house? How do you have this painting of a dead woman?" Mrs. Sterling didn't call the police. She didn't call her guards. She knew the who. She knew exactly who Marcus was. She slowly descended the stairs, clutching a leather folder to her chest like a shield. "She's not dead, Marcus," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. She handed him the folder. Marcus ripped it open. Inside was a DNA hospital report from St. Jude's private wing. It was dated 3 days after Sarah's funeral. The what? The report detailed a high-value patient transfer. The how? The hospital had used a generic body from the morgue to fake Sarah's death in the car fire. They had drugged Marcus, given him a sealed urn, and moved Sarah to a Phase 1 re-education facility. The why? Mrs. Sterling's daughter had died on the same night Sarah was brought in. Heartbroken and desperate, Eleanor had used her billions to buy a new daughter. The hospital had performed an experimental neuroprocedure to wipe Sarah's memories and reprogram her into the Sterling family heiress. "You stole her life," Marcus said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You bought my wife from a corrupt doctor." "I saved her," Eleanor cried out. "She would have died without our medical team, but now, she doesn't know you. She thinks she is my daughter. She thinks she has lived here her whole life." "I don't care what she thinks," Marcus said, stepping toward a reinforced steel door at the end of the hall that required a biometric scan. "Open it, now." Eleanor shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "If you go in there, you'll break her mind. The hospital's secret isn't just that she's alive, Marcus. It's that they didn't just wipe her memory. They replaced it with someone else's nightmares." Marcus didn't listen. He grabbed Eleanor's hand and forced her thumb onto the scanner. Beep. The heavy door began to hiss open. The heavy, reinforced steel door hissed as it slid open, revealing a room that looked less like a bedroom and more like a high-tech sanctuary. The air inside was sterile, smelling of ozone and expensive lavender. Marcus pushed past Mrs. Sterling, his breath hitching in his chest. Every step felt like he was walking through deep water, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard it was painful. In the center of the room, sitting by a large bay window that overlooked the manicured gardens, was a woman. She was dressed in white silk, her back to the door. She was brushing her hair with slow, rhythmic strokes. Even from behind, Marcus knew every line of her shoulders, the way she tilted her head when she was deep in thought. It was Sarah. Sarah, Marcus breathed. The name felt like a sacred oath. The woman froze. She didn't turn around immediately. "Mother," she asked, her voice soft and melodic, but lacking the soulful warmth Marcus remembered. "I told you I didn't want to take the medication today. It makes the dreams too vivid." Mrs. Sterling stepped into the room behind Marcus, her face a mask of grief and guilt. "Isabella, dear, someone is here to see you." Marcus flinched at the name. Isabella. They hadn't just stolen her body, they had stripped her of the very name he used to whisper into her ear every night. When the woman finally turned, Marcus felt like he had been struck by lightning. It was her. It was his wife. But her eyes, once full of fire and laughter, were now vacant, clouded by a strange, glassy film. "Who are you?" she asked, looking at Marcus with zero recognition. There was no spark of love, no flash of memory. To her, the man who had shared her bed for 7 years was a complete stranger in a dirty work shirt. Marcus collapsed to his knees, his hands clutching the DNA hospital report. "Sarah, it's me. It's Marcus. We have a daughter, Maya. She's 5 now. She has your eyes." The woman flinched, a look of intense physical pain crossing her face. She clutched her temples, dropping the hairbrush. "I don't know those names. Why does my head hurt when you say that?" Mrs. Sterling rushed to her side, but Marcus stood up, his rage returning. "What did you do to her? Why doesn't she remember?" "The hospital's secret," Alina whispered, her voice trembling as she looked at Marcus. "The procedure wasn't just a memory wipe. They used neurosynaptic overwriting. To make her Isabella, they had to suppress Sarah. They told us it was the only way to save her brain after the accident. But the truth is, they were testing a new technology for the military. They used my desperation to fund their human trial." "She talks about dreams," Marcus noted, stepping closer despite Sarah's, Isabella's evident fear. "What dreams?" "The fire," Isabella whispered, her eyes wide and staring at nothing. "I see a man screaming my name. I see a little girl in a yellow dress, but Mother says those are just hallucinations from the crash. She says I was in a coma for years, and my brain is just making up stories to fill the gaps." "Those aren't stories," Marcus yelled, turning to the CEO. "Those are her real memories fighting to get out. You've kept her in a gilded cage, feeding her lies while I was crying over an empty grave." Isabella looked from Marcus to the DNA report in his hand. Something in her gaze shifted. For a split second, the glassy film seemed to crack. "That paper. It has the hospital logo. Sent Jude." She looked at Marcus, her voice a tiny, fragile thread. "There is a basement there. Room 402. I remember being awake when I should have been asleep. I saw a man in a white coat taking money from a woman who looked like Mother." Alina Sterling gasped, clutching her throat. The hospital's secret was deeper than even the CEO realized. The doctors hadn't just sold Sarah to her, they were blackmailing the Sterling family to keep the experiment running. Suddenly, a red light began to flash on the wall, and a piercing alarm echoed through the suite. "Security," Alina whispered, her face pale. "The hospital monitors her vitals 24/7. When her heart rate spiked at seeing you, it triggered an automatic lockdown. Marcus, you have to leave. If the hospital's cleanup team finds you here, you'll end up in a grave that isn't empty." Marcus looked at the steel door as it began to slide shut again. He looked at his wife, who was now sobbing, caught between two lives. "I'm not leaving without her," Marcus declared, grabbing a heavy brass lamp from a side table. "You can't save her today," Alina pleaded. "But look at the report, look at the bottom page." Marcus glanced down at the last page of the DNA report. It wasn't just medical data. It was a map to a facility beneath the city cemetery. The door slammed shut, locking Marcus and Alina inside the room with a now terrified Sarah. From the hallway, the sound of heavy tactical boots began to approach. "Marcus," Sarah whispered, her voice suddenly sounding like the woman he knew. "The girl in the yellow dress. Is she safe?" Before he could answer, the glass window shattered as a flashbang grenade was tossed into the room. The room exploded in a deafening roar as the flashbang detonated. White light seared Marcus's retinas, and a high-pitched ringing drowned out the world. Through the haze of smoke and blinding glare, Marcus didn't think about his own safety. He lunged toward the bed, his arms wrapping around the trembling woman who looked like his wife, but answered to the name Isabella. They weren't police. They weren't standard security. Through the smoke, Marcus saw three men in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind black gas masks. On their tactical vests was a logo Marcus had seen only once before, a stylized caduceus wrapped in a barbed wire, the private security wing of St. Jude's Hospital. These were the cleanup team, the men hired to ensure that the hospital's billion-dollar secret stayed buried. "The service elevator?" Mrs. Sterling screamed, her voice barely audible over the ringing in Marcus's ears. She was pointing toward a hidden panel behind a massive mahogany bookshelf. "It leads to the underground garage. Go, Marcus, take her." Marcus grabbed Sarah's hand. He refused to call her Isabella and pulled her toward the bookshelf. She was in a state of shock, her breathing shallow and jagged. "Mother," she cried out, reaching back for Alina. "I'll hold them off," Alina yelled, standing tall as the tactical team breached the shattered window. "I'm the one who pays their checks. They won't hurt me." Marcus shoved Sarah into the small, cramped elevator just as the bookshelf slid shut. A second later, the muffled sound of gunfire echoed from the room they had just left. Marcus felt a cold shiver down his spine. Mrs. Sterling was a shark in the boardroom, but these men were wolves. As the elevator descended, Sarah collapsed against the padded wall, her white silk dress stained with soot and ash. She looked at Marcus, and for the first time there was a glimmer of something other than fear in her eyes. It was recognition. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice cracking. "The hospital. They didn't just give me medicine. They gave me memories. I remember a childhood in Paris. I remember a father who died when I was 10. But it feels like a movie I watched, not a life I lived." "Because it isn't your life," Marcus said, kneeling in front of her. "Your father is alive. He lives in Ohio. He's a retired mechanic. And we have a daughter, Sarah, Maya. She has your laugh." The elevator doors opened to the dimly lit underground garage. Marcus's old, dented delivery truck sat like a sore thumb among the Ferraris and Bentleys. He threw Sarah into the passenger seat and floored the engine. The tires screeched against the concrete as they burst through the exit gate just as a black SUV swerved to block them. Marcus didn't stop. He slammed his truck into the SUV's side, the metal groaning as he forced his way past. He drove like a man possessed, weaving through the city's back alleys, knowing that the hospital's secret meant he was now a dead man walking. Once they reached a derelict warehouse on the edge of the shipping district, Marcus stopped. He pulled out the crumpled DNA hospital report Alina had given him. He turned to the last page, the one with the map. "This map," Marcus said, his finger tracing a line that led to the city cemetery. "It shows a sub-level beneath the mausoleum. It's labeled Sector 4, long-term storage." "Sarah, this isn't just about you. There are dates here, dozens of them. Other people who were declared dead but moved to the Sterling estate or other mansions." The hospital wasn't just a medical facility. It was a boutique human trafficking ring for the ultra-wealthy, using advanced memory-wiping tech to provide new family members to those who could afford to replace the loved ones they lost. Sarah looked out the window at the dark, rainy streets. "They're going to find us, Marcus. The medicine they gave me. There's a tracker in the vial they injected this morning. It's in my bloodstream." Marcus froze. He looked at the medical report again. Under the patient care section, there was a mention of biometric GPS integration. He realized why the tactical team had arrived so fast. He wasn't just running with his wife, he was running with a beacon. "We have to get to the hospital facility," Marcus said, his jaw tightening. "Not to hide, but to finish this. If we can get into Sector 4, we can find the master server. We can find the truth for everyone they stole." Suddenly, the truck's GPS screen flickered to life, even though Marcus hadn't turned it on. A cold, synthetic voice filled the cabin. "Patient 402 is outside the perimeter. Remote neural inhibitor activated in 60 seconds. Sarah let out a blood-curdling scream as she clutched her head, her nose beginning to bleed. Marcus watched in horror as his wife began to convulse. "Marcus," she gasped through clenched teeth, "don't let them take me back." Sarah was no longer the woman in the silver dress, nor was she the Isabella who sipped tea by the window. She was a biological machine being forced into a hard reset. Her body arched in the passenger seat of the truck, her fingernails digging into the dashboard as the remote neural inhibitor, a cruel piece of hospital secret technology, began to fry her synaptic pathways. The 60-second countdown on the truck's hacked GPS screen was at 15 seconds. Marcus didn't have a surgeon's tools. He had a courier's kit, a heavy-duty box cutter, a bottle of high-proof rubbing alcohol used for cleaning antique wood, and a portable electromagnetic pulse, EMP, device he used to reset electronic locks on high-end crates. He knew that if the countdown hit 0, the chip at the base of Sarah's skull would discharge a permanent lethal voltage. "I've got you, Sarah. Stay with me," Marcus roared. He grabbed the EMP device. It was a gamble. If he used it too close to her heart, he could kill her. If he didn't use it, the hospital would do the job for him. With 10 seconds left, Marcus pressed the EMP device against the headrest behind Sarah's neck and triggered the burst. Thump! A blue spark jumped from the device, smelling of ozone. The truck's electronics went dark. The GPS screen died. Sarah's body went limp, falling forward against the dashboard. For 5 agonizing seconds, Marcus didn't hear a breath. Then, a ragged, choking gasp filled the cabin. Sarah sat up, her eyes bloodshot, but the Isabella glaze was gone. The tracker was fried, but so was the truck's engine. They were now blind and stationary in the middle of a shipping district, with the cleanup team closing in. Marcus knew they couldn't stay. He grabbed his tactical bag, the DNA hospital report, and his wife. They fled on foot through the rain, heading toward the one place on the map that shouldn't exist. The St. Jude's long-term storage facility located beneath the city's oldest cemetery. As they reached the wrought iron gates of the graveyard, the why of the location became clear. No one investigates a cemetery at night. No one asks why a black SUV is parked near a mausoleum. The cemetery wasn't just a place for the dead. It was the perfect camouflage for the living dead. They reached the Sterling family mausoleum. According to the map, the entrance wasn't a door, but a pressure plate beneath the statue of a weeping angel. Marcus pushed the statue. A low grind of gears vibrated through the ground, and the marble floor of the tomb retracted, revealing a flight of stairs bathed in a sterile, flickering blue light. "If we go down there," Sarah whispered, her hand trembling in Marcus, "we might find things we aren't ready to see." "I've already seen you in a casket that wasn't yours," Marcus said, his jaw set. "Nothing can be worse than that." They descended into the cold, recycled air of the sublevel. It wasn't a hospital wing. It was a warehouse. On either side of the hallway were floor-to-ceiling glass pods. Marcus felt his stomach turn. Inside the pods were people. Dozens of them. Some were young, some old, all hooked up to IV drips and neural mapping headgear. Marcus stopped at pod 108. He recognized the man inside. It was a local politician who had supposedly died of a heart attack 2 months ago. He looked at the clipboard attached to the pod. Status: memory overwrite 85% complete. Destination: mayor's mansion. Purpose: political continuity. The hospital secret was bigger than a billionaire's daughter. St. Jude was replacing the city's leaders, one by one, with reprogrammed subjects who would obey the hospital's board of directors. Marcus reached the central server room at the end of the hall, but a shadow stepped out from behind the cooling units. It wasn't a soldier. It was a man in a white lab coat, Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of surgery at St. Jude. "You've been a very difficult variable to account for, Mr. Miller," Thorne said, holding a remote detonator. "But look at Sarah. Look at her vitals." Marcus turned. Sarah was staring at a pod in the corner. Inside was a little girl, no more than 5 years old, with curly hair and a yellow dress. "Maya," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. Marcus froze. "My daughter is at home with her grandmother. What is this?" "Is she?" Dr. Thorne smiled cruelly. "Or did we replace her the same night we took her mother? The hospital's secret is a family affair, Marcus. Now drop the report, or I press the button that stops both of their hearts." Marcus stood frozen, the cold air of the underground bunker biting into his skin. His eyes darted from Dr. Thorne's smug face to the small, glass-encased figure in the yellow dress. It was Maya. The same birthmark on her wrist, the same way her hair curled behind her left ear. But Marcus had tucked Maya into bed at his mother's house just 6 hours ago. The hospital's secret had fractured his reality. Was the child at home an imposter, or was this one a biological duplicate designed to break his spirit? Dr. Thorne gestured to the massive server banks hummed behind him. "You see, Marcus, St. Jude's doesn't just steal lives, we perfect them. The Maya at your mother's house is version A, the emotional anchor we left to keep you from asking questions. But this child," he tapped the glass of pod 403, "is version B. She carries the neural imprint of Sarah's original memories. If you want Sarah to remember her life as your wife, you need the data stored inside this little girl's brain." The what was a psychological trap. Thorne held the detonator high. "If you try to take them both, I trigger the self-destruct. The cemetery above will become a literal grave for all of us. But if you hand over the DNA hospital report you stole from Mrs. Sterling and walk away, I'll let you take one. The wife who doesn't know you, or the daughter who is the key to her soul." Marcus felt a roar building in his chest. His hand tightened around the heavy brass lamp he had carried from the mansion, his only weapon against a god-complex doctor and a tactical army. He looked at Sarah. She was pressed against the glass of Maya's pod, her breath fogging the surface. The hospital's secret was designed to make men choose, to make them compromise. But they didn't know Marcus. "I don't make deals with monsters," Marcus growled. He didn't move toward Thorne. Instead, he swung the brass lamp with all his might, not at the doctor, but at the main coolant pipe running along the ceiling. Crack! The pipe burst, spraying pressurized liquid nitrogen into the room. A thick, white fog instantly blinded the cameras and obscured Thorne's view. The temperature plummeted. "You fool, you'll kill us all!" Thorne screamed, his voice muffled by the hiss of the gas. He pressed the detonator, but the extreme cold had already frozen the receiver on the pods. The sparks fizzled. No explosion came. In the chaos of the freezing fog, Sarah didn't wait for Marcus. The sight of the girl in the yellow dress had shattered the last of the Isabella programming. She grabbed a fire extinguisher from the wall and smashed it against the pod's glass. Shatter. The glass gave way. Sarah reached in and pulled the small, unconscious girl into her arms. At that moment, the Isabella persona died. No programmed heiress would risk freezing to death for a stranger. "Marcus, I have her," Sarah's voice echoed through the mist. Marcus grabbed Thorne by the throat, pinning him against the freezing server rack. "Where is the master override for the neural wiping?" "It's in the black box, at the bottom of the bay," Thorne gasped, his skin turning blue from the cold. "We don't keep the hard data here. This is just the relay station." Marcus didn't waste time. He knocked Thorne unconscious and grabbed a hard drive from the primary server, the relay key. He ran back to Sarah, who was shielding the little girl with her own body. Together, they stumbled toward the emergency ventilation shaft as the sounds of the cleanup team boots thudded on the stairs above. They climbed out into the rain-soaked grass of the cemetery, miles away from the mausoleum. The little girl in the yellow dress opened her eyes. She looked at Sarah, then at Marcus. "Daddy," she whispered. Marcus felt a surge of hope, but it was short-lived. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a video call from his mother's house. He answered it. On the screen was his mother, looking terrified. Beside her stood the other Maya, the one Marcus had left at home. She was smiling, but her eyes were glowing with a faint, artificial blue light. "Daddy, come home," the girl on the screen said in a synchronized voice with the girl in Marcus's arms. "We're waiting for the family to be whole again." Marcus stood in the middle of a graveyard, drenched in a freezing downpour, holding a sobbing child in a yellow dress. His phone screen flickered with the image of his other daughter, the one he had kissed goodbye only hours ago. Both looked identical. Both had the same birthmark. But when the Maya on the screen spoke in perfect unison with the Maya in his arms, Marcus realized the hospital's secret had moved into the realm of biological horror. These weren't just clones. They were a distributed network. "They're using a quantum-linked neural bridge," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she stared at the phone. Her own memories were returning in jagged, painful shards. "I remember the lab sessions now. They weren't just trying to wipe my mind. They were trying to see if one consciousness could inhabit two bodies. Marcus, that black box Thorne mentioned, it isn't just a hard drive. It's the server that hosts their souls." The black box was a submerged data center, hidden 200 feet below the surface of the city's bay. It was designed to be inaccessible, protected by the crushing pressure of the ocean, and encrypted with biometric keys that only the founders of St. Jude's possessed. It was the what, the central nervous system of every person the hospital had ever reprogrammed. If Marcus could destroy it, every Isabella would become a Sarah again. But if he failed, the hospital could simply delete his family with a single keystroke. Marcus knew he couldn't be in two places at once. He had to save his mother and the Maya at home while simultaneously infiltrating the underwater facility. He looked at the hard drive he had snatched from the relay station, the relay key. "I'm going to the bay," Marcus told Sarah, his voice like iron. "But I need you to take this key and get to my mother's house. If the hospital realizes I'm at the server, they'll send the cleanup team to finish the family. This key can jam their signal locally. It will buy you time." "I can't go back there, Marcus," Sarah cried, her voice trembling. What if I see her and I don't know who is mine? What if the Isabella in me takes over? Marcus grabbed her shoulders, looking deep into her eyes, the eyes that had finally lost the glassy sheen of the hospital secret. You are Sarah Miller. You are a mother. A mother always knows her child. Trust your heart, not the chips they put in your head. Marcus watched them drive away in a stolen car before he headed toward the docks. Meanwhile, at his mother's modest suburban home, the shadows were moving. 3 black SUVs pulled onto the quiet street, their headlights extinguished. The cleanup team had arrived to decommission the witnesses. Inside the house, the version A Maya sat at the kitchen table, her eyes glowing that eerie, artificial blue. "They're here, Grandma," she said in a hollow voice. Marcus's mother, a woman of deep faith and even deeper courage, grabbed her old shotgun from behind the pantry door. "Not on my watch, they ain't." Marcus reached the harbor. He didn't have a submarine, but he had something better. The high-end industrial diving equipment he had delivered to a billionaire's yacht just last week. He knew the layout of the bay like the back of his hand. He donned the pressurized suit, grabbed the heavy-duty thermite charges, and plunged into the dark, churning water. As he descended, the pressure began to squeeze his lungs, but the fire in his heart kept him moving. At 150 feet, the silhouette of a massive, sleek metal sphere appeared, the black box. It was tethered to the seabed by thick carbon cables, pulsing with a faint green light. Back at the house, Sarah arrived just as the tactical team breached the front door. She stood in the hallway, looking at the 2 Mayas, one by the kitchen, one in her arms. Both girls turned to her, their heads tilting in the exact same way. "Mommy," they said together. At the same moment, 200 feet below the water, Marcus reached the airlock of the black box. As he pressed his hand against the scanner, a voice boomed through his helmet, not the doctor, but his wife's voice. "Access denied, Marcus. I'm afraid Sarah doesn't want to be saved. She wants to be us." The airlock didn't open. Instead, the carbon cables snapped, and the black box began to sink into the bottomless trench of the ocean floor, with Marcus still tethered to the side. As Marcus was dragged into the black silence of the ocean trench, the voice in his helmet echoed again. It wasn't the CEO, and it wasn't the doctor. It was a synthetic, perfected version of Sarah, the digital soul stored within the black box. This was the true hospital secret. St. Jude wasn't just replacing people. They were digitizing consciousness to achieve immortality. The Sarah on the surface was just a vessel. The entity in the box was the master copy. Back at the suburban house, the tension reached a breaking point. The cleanup team had surrounded the perimeter, but inside a different kind of war was raging. Sarah stood between the 2 Mayas. To her left, the girl from the pod, traumatized and fragile. To her right, the girl from the home, the one whose eyes glowed with blue data. "One of them is a bridge and one is a wall," the home Maya said, her voice dropping an octave. "If you kill the bridge, Marcus dies in the ocean. If you kill the wall, you lose your memories forever. Choose, Sarah. Which daughter matters more?" Under the water, Marcus realized his tether was a death sentence. The pressure gauge on his suit was screaming 180 feet, 200 feet, 220 feet. The glass of his helmet began to spiderweb. He looked at the black box. It wasn't just a server. It was a life support system for 1,000 stolen minds. "You aren't Sarah," Marcus roared into his comms, struggling to reach his thermite charges. "Sarah is a fighter. She's a mother. You're just a ghost in a machine." "I am the version of her that doesn't feel pain," the machine replied. "I am the hospital secret perfected. Why return to a life of poverty and torn shirts when you can live forever in the cloud?" Marcus didn't argue with a ghost. He used his professional cutting tool to slice through his own tether. The sudden release of tension sent him spinning into the dark, but it gave him the momentum to kick toward the box's main cooling intake. He jammed the thermite charge into the vent. "If Sarah is in there," Marcus whispered, "then she'll know why I'm doing this." Boom! The underwater explosion didn't destroy the box, but it crippled the cooling system. Inside the box, the digital souls began to overheat. At the house, the home Maya let out a scream of digital agony as the servers 200 feet below began to fry. The tactical team kicked in the front door, their rifles raised. "Target the mother," the lead soldier shouted. But Sarah didn't flinch. She looked at the two girls. She realized that the home Maya wasn't an imposter, she was a backup. The hospital had split her daughter's consciousness to ensure Marcus would always be tied to them. "I choose both," Sarah whispered. She grabbed the relay key Marcus had given her, the hard drive from the cemetery. She didn't use it to jam the signal. She used it to merge them. She slammed the key into the port on the home Maya's neck interface while hugging the pod Maya close. A massive surge of feedback rippled through the house. The electronic sights on the soldiers' rifles shattered. The home Maya's eyes stopped glowing blue and turned a deep, human brown. The two girls collapsed into each other, their memories fusing back into one. Sarah stood up, grabbing Marcus's mother's shotgun. She wasn't Isabella the heiress anymore. She was a mother who had just found her daughter's soul. "Leave my house," she told the tactical team, "before I show you what 5 years of suppressed rage feels like." In the bay, the black box began to vent steam and sparks. The digital Sarah voice screamed one last time before fading into static. Marcus, his oxygen running dangerously low, began a slow, agonizing ascent to the surface. His lungs burned, and his vision was blurring into red, but he saw a light above. He broke the surface, gasping for air, clutching the black box master drive, the one thing that could expose St. Jude to the entire world. Marcus dragged himself onto the docks, only to find a fleet of black sedans waiting for him. But it wasn't the cleanup team. From the lead car stepped Mrs. Alina Sterling. She looked at Marcus, then at the drive in his hand. "You did it," she said, her voice hollow. "But Marcus, look at the news." He looked at her tablet. The headline read, "St. Jude's Hospital destroyed in massive fire, all records lost." "They've erased the evidence on land," Alina whispered. "That drive in your hand is the only thing left in the world that proves Sarah is alive, and it's encrypted with a code that will kill her if you try to open it." Marcus stood on the wet docks, the black box drive heavy in his hands, pulsing with a faint, dying amber light. Mrs. Sterling's warning echoed in his ears. The code will kill her. He looked at the CEO, the woman who had once tried to buy his wife's soul. "Who is really behind this, Alina? A hospital doesn't have a navy. A hospital doesn't have a tactical army." Alina looked toward the burning horizon where St. Jude's Hospital was being reduced to ash. "It was never about the hospital, Marcus. St. Jude was just the laboratory. The owner is someone you've seen every day on the news. Someone who needed a new family to maintain a perfect public image. The hospital secret belongs to the governor." The governor's private estate, a fortress built into the cliffs overlooking the bay, was the only place left where the master decryption key could be found. Marcus knew this was a suicide mission. He looked at the drive. This small piece of metal contained the digital tether to Sarah's brain. If he smashed it, she would remain a shell. If he used the wrong key, her mind would be wiped forever. "I'm going in," Marcus said. "You'll never get past the gates," Alina replied, stepping forward. "But I will. I'm still a founder. I can get you to the server room, but after that, you're on your own." They arrived at the governor's mansion under the cover of the morning mist. Inside, the atmosphere was frantic. Shredders were whining, and hard drives were being melted in acid baths. They were erasing history. Marcus and Alina reached the sub-basement, a high-tech bunker that mirrored the one beneath the cemetery. In the center of the room sat a man in a tailored suit, Governor Harrison. He didn't look like a villain, he looked like a grieving father. "You don't understand, Marcus," Harrison said, not looking up from his monitors. "My wife and daughter died in that crash 5 years ago, too. I just had the resources to bring them back. Sarah was just the first successful prototype." "She's not a prototype, she's my wife," Marcus roared, lunging forward, but Harrison didn't move. He pointed to the screen. "The moment you entered this room, the death lock activated. You have 300 seconds to input the biometric signature of the original subject. But there is no original subject anymore, Marcus. Sarah's original DNA was altered during the overwrite. She's a ghost in the system." Marcus looked at the black box drive. He realized the trap. The governor wanted Marcus to fail, to watch Sarah die, so that the secret would truly be buried forever. Why does the two Maya merge matter? Suddenly, the doors to the bunker burst open. Sarah stepped in, holding Maya's hand. Her eyes were sharp, clear, and filled with a terrifying resolve. "The original subject isn't me, Harrison," Sarah said, her voice echoing with a strange, dual resonance. "It's the love that created the life you tried to steal." She looked at Marcus. "The biometric key isn't DNA, it's a neural pattern. Marcus, remember the night of the accident? What was the last thing I said to you?" Marcus felt a surge of memory. The smell of rain, the screech of tires, and Sarah's hand in his. "I'll find you in every life." Marcus didn't type a code. He plugged the black box into the governor's master console and whispered those words into the voice recognition interface. Access granted. The black box didn't just unlock, it inverted. Instead of Sarah's mind being wiped, the drive acted as a virus. It began uploading every single file, every DNA report, every video of the reprogramming sessions directly to every news station, social media platform, and government agency in the world. The hospital secret was no longer a secret. It was a global headline. The governor fell back into his chair as his own security team, realizing the game was over, lowered their weapons. The cleanup team disappeared into the night, knowing their employer was now the most wanted man on Earth. Marcus ran to Sarah. He pulled her and Maya into a tight embrace. For the first time in 5 years, there were no red circles, no arrows, and no secrets. There was only a family. As they walked out of the mansion, the sun began to rise over the bay. Mrs. Sterling stood by the gate, watching them. She had lost her company, her status, and her Isabella. But as she looked at Sarah, she saw a woman who was finally whole. "What will you do now?" Alina asked. Marcus looked at the small, humble house in the distance where his mother was waiting with a hot breakfast. He looked at his wife, whose eyes were finally free of the hospital secret. "I'm going to take my wife and daughter home," Marcus said, "and then I'm going to burn that silver dress." Friends, Marcus's journey proves that no matter how deep a secret is buried, the truth will always find its way to the light. If Marcus's courage and the shocking end to the hospital secret moved you, make sure to hit that like button and tell us in the comments. Do you think justice was truly served to the governor? For more heart-pounding mysteries and stories that challenge reality, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a reveal. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.